गिरि परदारी यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी जय गोपी जन वल्लभा गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रज जन रंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी जय राधा माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे हरे जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा शील प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा शील प्रभुपादा जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस प्रत्यक्ष अष्टोत्तर सदस्य श्रीमद इस्कॉन विशेष भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। इस्कॉन संस्थापक श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस प्रत्यक्ष अष्टोत्तर सदस्य श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय। जय ओम विष्णुपाद लाहौर किशोरदास बाबा महाराज की जय। जय ओम विष्णुपाद सच्चिदानंद श्री भक्ति ठाकुर की जय। जय ओम विष्णुपाद वैष्णव सार्वभौम श्री जगन्नाथ दास महाराज की जय। जय श्री रूप साराधन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री जी गोपाल भट्टदास रघुनाथ शंकर गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय। नमाचार्य श्रीदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री वैद्यनाथ शिवसादि गौर भक्तवृंद की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपिनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड के गोवर्धन की जय। श्री श्री गौरांगी बेंगलोरेश्वर भगवान की जय। श्री मायापुर धाम की जय। श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय। गंगा माई की जय। यमुना माई की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। तुलसी देवी की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव की जय। श्री हरनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद भागवतम की जय। इस्कॉन वर्तमान को वृंद की जय। Samavita Bhakti Gaura Premanande. All glories to the assembly. This all glories to the assembly. This all glories to the assembly. This all glories to Shiguru and Shigauranga. All glories to Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashtaprayeshu Patreshu Nityam Bhagavat Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtihi. Welcome all to the Friday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 23, Text 53 and 54. Text 20, Text 53. Yeta avataram kalena pratikrantena me prabho indriyartha prasangena parityakta paratmanaha. Translation to Prabhupada. Until now, we have simply wasted so much of our time in sense gratification, neglecting to cultivate knowledge of the Supreme Lord. Human life is not meant to be wasted like that of the animals in sense gratificatory activities. Animals always engage in sense gratification, eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating, but that is not the engagement of the human being, although because of the material body, there is need of sense gratification according to a regulative principle. So in effect, Devahuti said to her husband, so far we have these daughters and we have enjoyed material life in the aerial mansion, traveling all over the universe. These boons have come by your grace, but they have all been for sense gratification. Now there must be something for my spiritual advancements. Text 54. Indriyarteshu sajjantya prasangastvai me kritaha ajanantya param bhavam tatapi astva avayaya me. Indriyarteshu sajjantya prasangastvai me kritaha ajanantya param bhavam tatapyastu avayaya me. Indriyarteshu sajjantya prasangastvai me kritaha ajanantya param bhavam tatapyastu avayaya me. Translation Srila Prabhupada. Not knowing your transcendental situation, I have loved you while remaining attached to the objects of the senses. Nonetheless, let the affinity I have developed for you rid me of all fear. Devahuti is lamenting her position. As a woman, she had to love someone. Somehow or other, she came to love Kardamuni, but without knowing of his spiritual advancement. Kardamuni could understand Devahuti's heart. Generally, all women desire material enjoyment. They are called less intelligent because they are mostly prone to material enjoyment. Devahuti laments because her husband had given her the best kind of material enjoyment, but she did not know that he was so advanced in spiritual realization. Her plea was that even though she did not know the glories of her great husband, because she had taken shelter of him, she must be delivered from material entanglement. Association with a great personality is most important. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, Lord Chaitanya says that Sadhu Sangha, the association of a great saintly person, is very important because even if one is not advanced in knowledge, simply by association with a great saintly person, one can immediately make considerable advancement in spiritual life. As a woman, as an ordinary wife, Devahuti became attached to Kardamuni in order to satisfy her sense enjoyment and other material necessities. But actually, she associated with a great personality. Now she understood this and she wanted to utilize the advantage of the association of her great husband. Om Jnanatimirantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurnitam Yena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Sri Chaitanya Manopishtam Stapitam Yena Bhuttale Swayam Rupakadamahyam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Vidapadakamalam Sri Guru Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Saganargunatanitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sabhadutam Parijan Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Saganalita Sri Vishakantvitamscha Ye Krishna Karuna Sinto Dinabanto Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namaste Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarupyascha Kapasnubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Moham Karudi Vachalam Pangam Nande Digam Yakapat Mahamande Shri Guram Denadharma Paramandamadam Shri Chaitanya Meshwaram. Hare Krishna. So here we see in these two verses, in verse 53, Devahuti is addressing Kardin Muni, that she's telling that we have wasted so much of our time in sense gratification, neglecting to cultivate knowledge of the Supreme Lord. So here Srila Prabhupada is mentioning in the purport, what is the difference between human life and animal life? And there is a very important point that Srila Prabhupada mentions, that animals also have this propensity to enjoy, because as long as one is in an engaged body of a human being, he also has to have some sense gratification. That's how the body is created. But in the case of a human being, it has to be according to a regulative principle. That means even human beings have the same propensities as the animal life, but in human life, form of life, one can satisfy his senses in a regulative principle. That is that four principles of all living beings are eating, mating, defending, and sleeping. But here it refers to specifically, when we say regulative principle, that it has to be based on the Sadhu Shastra and Guru. That is, Krishna himself says that sense gratification should not be done. Sex cannot be utilized as a means of sense gratification, but it can be done for procreation. So when we say procreation, that means it is for satisfaction of Lord Krishna. And here Devahuti is telling him that we have these daughters and we have enjoyed material life and also aerial mansion traveling all over the universe. So now she says that I have achieved all these by your grace, but they have all been for sense gratification. Now, human life is actually specifically meant for a higher purpose of self-realization. And one gets this form of human life after going through many, many species of life. Now, when it comes to human life, in the yesteryears also, see, during Srila Prabhupada's time, actually, the disciples of Srila Prabhupada took Srila Prabhupada to a zoo. And many devotees were also there, and they were showing Srila Prabhupada so many animals. But Srila Prabhupada was not in favor of animals being kept in a cage, because this is not the natural habitat of anybody or any animal. Nobody would like to be put in the cage. So then when they came to a lion's cage, the attendant actually came and threw a big piece of meat. And as soon as he threw, the male lion jumped on it because it was very, very hungry. After that, if the female lion came and pounced on the same meat, and then thereafter the cubs came. So Srila Prabhupada said the lions were so hungry that they could have eaten their cubs also, but the Lord has given them emotions and have also given them knowledge. So even the lions or other species have also been given some knowledge, but they don't have the intelligence to understand what is that knowledge to be used for. Whereas human being can understand, in the human form of life, one can understand that knowledge has to be utilized for self-realization. Now, in the yesteryears, there's an example of, even in the Ramayana, when Vishwamitra came, he was a saint. He came to see Dasaratha. His first inquiry when they met was that, is everything going well in your endeavor to conquer the repetition of birth and death? That means when the same Vishwamitra came to see King Dasaratha, he did not ask anything else, but the first question is asked was, is everything going well in your endeavor to conquer the repetition of birth and death? That means he is asking the king, what have you done for your self-realization? So one's aim of life, whether he's whatever his prescribed duties may be, when he is in the human formula of life, it is only for men to stop the suffering, that is birth, death, old age, and disease. Even in Mahabharata, there is a very nice example of how a Brahmana once asked his father. He says that since life passes so quickly, what duty should a person perform without fail? So the father replies, initial life should be as a brahmachari to vow of celibacy and study Vedas. So in brahmachari ashram, one brahmachari form of life, one has to have observed celibacy and studied the Vedas. That means one has to study the Vedas during their earlier part of the life. Now that cannot be done without observing celibacy. Then when one comes to the grihastha, then he can marry if he is not in a position to control his senses, and then beget children who can deliver him from the cycle of birth and death, and also the ancestors. That means one enters the grihastha to deliver himself from the cycle of birth. We'll understand this part of it. Then afterwards, what happens is that one goes to vanaprastha to engage in self-realization. So deliverance from the cycle of birth and death for one's soul self, and also deliverance of the ancestors, happens by begetting a son, not by begetting daughters. So here we see that Devoti says that all these daughters have also enjoyed their material life. That means she's pointing that she should have a son who can deliver them from the cycle of birth and death. Then the Brahmana says that one should enter vanaprastha stage to engage in self-realization. Then the son asked, since death can come at any point of time, why wait till vanaprastha time for self-realization? Why should I wait to have children to deliver me? Why not I take it up straight away? The Brahmana's father was very impressed, and he said that I should have done it before. The point is that whatever form, whatever varna, whatever ashrama one is situated in, the human form of life is meant only to become free from the cycle of birth and death. So Bhishma Deva also in his instructions to Yudhishthira Maharaj has given so many instructions on this as to how one should rule a kingdom. When he was relinquishing his body, he was giving to Yudhishthira Maharaj how one should actually practice the process of self-realization. There is also an example given in Chaitanya Charitamrita, where Srila Sanatana Goswami meets Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he asked Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he tells actually Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, I was born in a low family. I mean, Sanatana Goswami was an exalted personality, but he humbled himself. He said that I was born in a low family and my associates are all low-class men. I am myself fallen and the lowest of men. Indeed, I have passed my whole life fallen in the well of sinful materialism. I do not know what is beneficial for me or what is detrimental. That means Sanatana Goswami, at his exalted state, is humbling himself down to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and putting a petition that I have born the lowest of species of life and I have been in the well of sinful materialism. I don't know what is beneficial for me or what is detrimental for me. This is a question that we all should ask. What is beneficial for us and what is detrimental? So nevertheless, imagine what to talk of ordinary people like us. And so he's asking, out of your costless mercy, you have delivered me from the materialistic path. Now by the same mercy, please tell me what is my duty. Who am I? Why do the threefold miseries always give me trouble? If I do not know this, how can I be benefited? So the good thing is we all should ask who am I, and why these threefold miseries of Adhyatmic, Adibhautik, and Adidevic give us trouble. And he says, if I do not know this, how can I be benefited? And then he says, actually, I do not know how to inquire about the goal of life and the process of obtaining it. Being merciful upon me, please explain to me these truths. So this is how Sanatana Goswami put a petition to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Of course, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu knew who Sanatana Goswami was. He said, Lord Krishna has already bestowed his full mercy upon you so that these things can be known to you. For you, these threefold miseries do not exist at all. But since you possess Krishna's potency, you certainly know. However, it is the nature of a sadhu to inquire. That means, however great a devotee may also be, he should always keep this process of inquiry going on. Because what happens, sometimes we may enter the path of self-realization, but sometimes we may feel that I have already reached a matured stage. It doesn't happen. There is no maturity in spiritual life. It seems to be a constant process of inquiry. So then he says that those who are eager to awaken their spiritual consciousness and thus have unflinching, undeviated intelligence certainly attain the desired goal of life very soon. So that means those intelligence has been given to everybody. In the case of the lion also, it was given intelligence. In fact, many times there are quotes that animals are much more organized or much more civilized than human beings. Why? Because examples are given. If you see a group of ants, when they go in a small, very straightforward line. They will not deviate. They will not get scattered. So this is an example that even among other species of life or animals or birds, other lower species form of species of life, there is some discipline. But in the human form of life, when we see today, mostly most of them are so ignorant of spiritual life. And not to talk about spiritual life, even material life, they are very, very undisciplined. So human form of life is meant to discipline oneself, even in the case of sense gratification, which is available in animal life also. So here he says that daughters have already been, she has already enjoyed the presence of these daughters, and they have enjoyed material life in the aerial mansion also. That means when daughters, particularly there is this mention that next sloka about how women are more addicted to sense enjoyment very easily than men. Of course, nowadays there is no distinction between men and women. Also, we see that women who become devotees of the Lord, they are also very much organized spiritually and disciplined because of their spiritual activities. Now, what happens is that particularly women, they have an easy tendency to get attracted to the beauty of this material world. So that is why it is said that women have more attitude towards sense gratification than men. But of course, nowadays it's the same for everybody. Now, when men are there and they take to the process of self-realization, then what happens is that they used to offer oblations, they used to perform sacrifices, and this way deliver their parents and also all the ancestors. But when the generation which we see now, they are not spiritually placed, what happens is they go to hell. The purpose of their, which they are supposed to do, of delivering their parents and ancestors, that is also not taking place. So the already the ancestors are suffering in hellish condition. An example is given even in the Shastras that during the Esther years, even King Anga, he did not have a son, but he wanted to have a son, for which later on he got a son. By the mercy of the saintly person, he got some associates. He was actually King Chitraketu. So he got mercy of Narad Muni and all. And later on, when he came younger, he did not have a son. But later when he got a son called the name of Vena, who was actually a source of misery for them. Sorry, this is not Chitraketu. So this Vena was a big trouble, and he used to be like literally like what we see today. And he was a big misery for his source of misery for his parents. So this is what happens when children become a source of misery, because they don't take up the path of spiritual life. Now, if we see in Bhagavad Gita also, Arjuna was reluctant to fight. He came to a point that dishonor is better than death. Now, why this fear comes into the human form of life, we'll understand, which is the basis of this sloka, two slokas. All species of life have one thing in common, that is fear. And this fear is because, particularly in the human form of life also, there is fear because by nature, we are all supposed to be eternal. But because we have accepted a material body and something happens to the body, we are always fearful. For example, some injury happens to any part of the body, we always feel fearful. So we are also afraid of death. In fact, it is mentioned in the Shastras that at the time of death, uh, the pain of death is equivalent to the bite of some 40,000 scorpions or so. This is given by quotes by many. Now, one scorpion bite itself is very painful. So imagine if 40,000 scorpions bite at one time, how painful it would be. There are also mentions that at the time of death, the person who is about to leave his body is not in a position to speak, he is not in a position to express anything, but he sees the Yamadutas coming. And they are all the Yamadutas. In this thing, it is said that they are very, very fearful to look at. They have very ugly look, very dark bodies, and then very ugly to look at, very fearful to look at. So it is mentioned that the people who are at the time of leaving their body, they see these Yamadutas. What to talk of people, it is also, if we see many times, we may see a dog howling. It is said that they can smell these things very easily, that something very unforeseen is going to happen. That's how they howl. So it is very difficult to go through that stage of death, which is mentioned in the Shastra. Why? Because people are very, very fearful. And this fearful, we see, is a very vital aspect in one's life. And one can overcome this fear only by taking shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So here we see that Devahuti was actually lamenting her position. So why? Because she felt that all this time she has spent her time with Kardamuni without understanding. Of course, this is to set an example to us, because she herself was a great devotee of the Lord. But then she's showing that all this time she spent time with Kardamuni for material enjoyment, because Kardamuni built a great aerial mansion, took her all through the universe, and then finally, when they had physical union, what happens was she got daughters. And what will happen to these daughters? By the nature of creation itself, the way Lord has created, daughters are meant to get married and go to their husband's house. Why? Because women are meant to be protected. Now here it is mentioned women are less intelligent. It does not mean that women are less intelligent, but women are more prone to sense gratification than taking a spiritual path. If you see in what respect this is mentioned, even physically, a woman needs protection. That means a man is not meant only for her sense gratification, but even otherwise, physically, a woman needs protection. The example is given that if a woman police inspector is going on the streets in the nights, she is accompanied by many male members, because she cannot protect herself, whereas a male member may be able to protect. So this is how protection is given to women, which is created by the Lord himself. So in the initial stages of a girl's life, she's protected in her father's home very well. And when she gets married, she is protected by her husband. And the earlier days, the husband and wife used to go on a vanaprastha stage. That means both husband and wife used to go wherever possible. And after returning back, the wife would stay with her children, because she needs to be cared for by somebody. And the husband would go to the forests or animals and practice this self-realization process. Of course, nowadays it is not practically possible. But after one enters the vanaprastha stage, a woman is meant to be protected by her son. So this is how a woman is protected at all stages of life. And here Kardamuni Devahuti is telling her husband that she has developed She wants someone to be, what she says, not knowing your transcendent situation, I have loved you, while remaining attached to the object of senses. That means all through she was attached to her daughters, which generally happens. And she was also given the process of sense gratification by traveling through the universe. And she said, now I have developed, nonetheless, let that affinity I have developed for you rid me of all fear. That means Devahuti has got some affinity for Kardamuni also, and she wants him to remove her fear. So why she is lamenting? Because who will take care of her when her daughters leave? So she says that even though she was associating with Kardamuni, she did not understand the glories of Kardamuni. So what happens is that in a family life, time passes very, very quickly. Nobody knows that how time passes. So when someone is situated in a grihasthashrama, then what happens is that the husband and wife live together, which we see today. Then children come, husband is busy working, the wife is also busy working at home. Then she has to take care of children, she has to cook. So many things are there. Then the children go to school, college, so many things are there that everybody is busy, busy, busy. This is how the material life is created. In the process, one forgets the goal of one's life. That is why it is said that this material world is nothing but a material entanglement. And now she did not realize until now how the time passed. But time passes very, very fast, even without us realizing. That's why they say that time flies. Time doesn't fly, time is static. But we see that the time as flying because when we are engaged in sense gratification, the time flies like anything. That means when we enjoy, when we think we are enjoying our life, time flies very fast. But at the same time, when we see that we are in a position of suffering, at that time we will realize time does not pass at all. This is a fact of life. So this fear is something that everyone in every species of life has got. And this fear is one of the vital aspects. Now, time that is that same time can be utilized in acquiring knowledge of the Lord, which is the purpose that is mentioned in these two verses. There is a mention in the Shastras, Bhagavad Gita, yes, that after acquiring perfect transcendental knowledge, one acquires qualitative equality with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, becoming free from the repetition of birth and death. That means when one takes up the process to understand the transcendental knowledge, which is what is mentioned here, then what happens is that one becomes in quality equal to the Lord, but then one has to use it. When one uses that knowledge, uses one's intelligence to acquire spiritual knowledge, then one becomes equal to the Lord and becomes free. One is not anymore contaminated by the three modes of material nature. That knowledge which is not contaminated by the three modes of material nature is what is called transcendental knowledge. And that is the difference between the human form of life and the other species, other forms of life. Time is so subtle. We can't see time. We may be used to seeing a watch, but we don't see how time is passing. That's why it said that time is subtle. At the same time, it is very, very powerful also. And everything appears to happen in a moment of time. That is how time actually destroys or takes up the process. That is Krishna as time is takes this process of annihilation, and it is an expansion of the Lord himself. That is why time can be described as past, present, and future. When we are speaking now, if we speak even a hello to somebody, that one moment has already passed. So that present has already become past, and future, what we might think, we might say, what will be my future? By the time what we say, what is my future, that has become present, and that is also past. So this is how they say that time flies, and it is very fearful. Actually, It is said in the universe that the universal form of the Lord, which was shown to Arjuna in Mahabharata, which is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna became so fearful of seeing the universal form that Arjuna could visualize that this is considered to be a fearful form of time. So this is how the universal form is also given to understand that it is a form of time. It is a reminder that time is passing and for us to wake up in our spiritual life. And if not for Kala or time, we would not have woken up, because at some point of time, it brings us to a stage of fear. And that is when we start waking up. When we become fearful of a situation in life, then we ask, why am I being brought to this stage? That is when one starts the process of inquiry. But time does not affect a devotee, because his body is spiritually conscious. He is not anymore in the body conscious, but he is spiritual conscious. The example is given that Srila Prabhupada could travel at a very old age because he was spiritually charged. So the more we are advancing in the spiritual path, we are placed on the spiritual platform, not on the bodily conscious of platform. That means the point is that time is very, very powerful, and one has to utilize every moment of time. That is why Chanakya Pandya says that even one moment of time spent cannot be regained by millions of gold coins. Therefore, what greater loss is there when time is spent uselessly? Now, so every moment of time has to be utilized in the service of Krishna. Then we are not affected by time factor. Now, when we take up the spiritual path, that also is a progressive path. One does not become completely situated in the process of self-realization overnight. It does not happen. It is a spiritual progressive path. One starts getting some association, then they start hearing, then they start chanting, and then it's a process. And then when one develops a taste, then what happens is that one becomes realized, and he thinks, yes, one day if we are used to chanting and hearing and be situated in the association of devotees, if one day we are not able to be without that, we will see the difference. So that is how the reason is that one cannot say that I'm totally 100% self-realized and situated spiritually, that Maya cannot overcome. Maya can overcome anyone at any point of time. In fact, Srila Prabhupada always used to quote, the most fearful thing is Maya. Anyone can fall victim to Maya at any point of time. So there is a nice analogy that is given from the teachings of Prahlad Maharaj, in which he says, in the first 10 years of life as a child, one is lost in bewilderment, because after 10 years, a child is not so intelligent enough to understand. The next 10 years are generally spent in sports and play. So after 20 years, we see that children are mostly young, and young youth, they are mostly interested in the path of sports and playing. The last 20 years in bed and are sense gratification. At a time, that is when he can't, after that one reaches, what you call, if we see today, 20 years, from 20 to 40 people generally work very hard in the process that they don't even get time to think what is the goal of life. And last 20 years, what happens? They are almost in bed because they cannot sleep. They are very weak, and because they have spent the whole time in family, in this sense gratification. If some time is left, what they do is they go to a club, or they go to some form of entertainment. This way, the human form of life is wasted. But if we are able to utilize this time that is available right from the beginning of one's stage of life, it becomes easier for one to progress. Here, Devahuti is a perfect devotee. Karda Muni is a perfect devotee. Our daughters were also devotees, as we see subsequently who they are and whom they got married to. Now Devahuti feels that she will be alone. And that is why she says that they have spent time in sense gratification. Now give me something for my spiritual advancement. So when she says spiritual advancement, she is looking for Karda Muni to satisfy her desire of having a son who will free her from all that fear. So a son is there and who comes as Lord Kapila Dev, and he explains the Sankhya philosophy to her, which is actually explaining by analogy what is the human form of life, how it can be utilized for self-realization. So with her prayers, Kardamuni blesses her with a son who is Lord Kapila himself, and then Kardamuni leaves. This is how the whole process goes. So the point is that everyone in this material world has fear, but fear itself is, it is said that afraid of fear because uh, uh, fear is so complex that we cannot understand, but fear can drive one into a situation that fear is very difficult to overcome fear. But one can take shelter of the Lord and become free from that fear. Now, it also mentioned that how fear can be healthy also, and it can be unhealthy also. Kamsa was also fearful of the Lord, but he had fear of Lord Krishna. So that was okay with him. But Parikshit Maharaj, on the contrary, we say that he was not fearful of death. He came to take instructions from Sukadeva Goswami. And after taking instructions, he became free of all that fear. And then he says that, please come and let that bird Takshaka or whatever has been bird has been arranged to bring me to the source of, to be a source of death. Let it come. And so at this time, when I am absorbed in the thoughts of the absolute truth, that means when one is absorbed in the thoughts of absolute truth, he becomes free from the fear of death also, which I explained that death is very, very fearful. That's why Srila Prabhupada says that one should have a healthy fear, not for material protection, but to be fearful of the material energy. What is that material energy? Maya. So Srila Prabhupada quotes that Maya, we should have a fear that Maya should not capture us. That fear brings us closer to Krishna. Because when we fear, yes, Maya can catch us at any point of time, then that will take up, make us help progress in the devotional service. Srila Prabhupada also mentions that devotional service is such that it is like a razor, very, very sharp, and sometimes can cut your skin. So devotional, when you see that many times when someone is shaving, he gets injured by that razor. So devotional service is very, very powerful. At the same time, it is like a razor, where one cannot enjoy sense gratification at the same time practice a spiritual path. So how can one overcome this fear? Again, she's asking for a son. Devahuti says that all these times she did not realize Karda Muni's potency as a great devotee of the Lord. So now she is seeking his shelter as a devotee. So one should utilize one's moment, even with association of devotees, not for material progress, but for spiritual advancement. Now, in the case of Srila Prabhupada, he set a perfect example in society by giving the same spiritual life or spiritual path to both a man and woman. He did not differentiate because he looked at the soul within the woman's body and the soul within a man's body. So he encouraged women also to take up the spiritual life. He even gave them Brahmanical initiation, which was a system that was never existed before. And he made many of them even as pujaris and temple presidents also. And it is said that even today, there are many women pujaris in the overseas countries. So that was the vision that Srila Prabhupada had of women also, of elevating them spiritually. So the point that we must understand from this is that though women are prone to material enjoyment, but at the same time they can be spiritually enlightened also. At the same time, they need physical protection. Once during Srila Prabhupada's time, there's a nice example. He was in the USA. So he was discussing on this subject. A reporter came to him and asked, why do you say women are subordinate to man? They are all equal. Then Srila Prabhupada replied, why don't you give birth to a child and breastfeed the child? That means women are created with a specific purpose. And even within that specific purpose, one can take up to the process of devotional service. So it is mentioned that when man and women work together with their respective natures, complementing each other, then that is perfection in the society. That means if both husband and wife work together in their respective nature, also complementing each other means understanding each other's values in terms of spiritual path. That is perfection in the society. The next point that is mentioned here is that taking shelter of an devotee of the Lord, one should try to take shelter of him for spiritual protection, not for material. Of course, material protection is also, but spiritual advancement. Now, what happens is that normally when you are there with the husband, always looking at the process of sense gratification, we forget the spiritual part. But the real process is that seeking shelter for spiritual advancement. That is why Devahuti is mentioning that she was all this time attached to him as a wife, but now she wants to be free from her sense enjoyment, and that because all her material necessities have been fulfilled by Kardamuni. Kardamuni has fulfilled all her material desires. Now she has reached a point she wants to become free from fear. So if you see in our life also, we are always engaged in the point of sense gratification. And this sense gratification brings us to a stage of frustration also. Why? Because that path, what we have taken, is like chewing the chew. Today we might see something very satisfactory to our senses. For example, if we like rasgulla, today we might take one, tomorrow we might take two, day after tomorrow we might take 50, 10 or 15, whatever it is. But by doing so, what happens is that we start developing frustration, because what is this every day? In spite of taking so many rasgullas, I'm not having a taste for it. This is how the material enjoyment is. It will bring us once to a stage of frustration. That is why then we think that I should have something else. Then if we are not able to understand that rasgulla was also dangerous due to addiction, then we might look for another sweet which might also give us addiction. So the point is that material enjoyment is like that only. And one should always see that all these are bringing sources of misery and fear for us. So the relationship between husband and wife sometimes can be very close. Now from here it is to be concluded that even though wife is supposed to be subordinate to her husband, still sometimes she can be prone to sense gratification, but still she has to reach out of fear. She reaches a stage where she takes shelter. So a woman should always seek shelter of a devotee husband who is a devotee of the Lord. And when the husband gives her further encouragement or inspiration in the spiritual path, she becomes free from fear. So even if the husband leaves his body and she has children who are devotees of the Lord, she feels secure. Otherwise, material facility even a son can give or a daughter can give, but the consistency of spirit to become free from this material fear can be given by a son who can inspire her spiritually by giving knowledge, by giving relationship that way. So we will see that how Lord Kapila came to her as her son to give this transcendental knowledge. So one should not seek material enjoyment in the association of saintly personalities also. Many times we might see that a guru or a very saintly person might come, who might come to give association, to give that, when we have the association of pure devotees of the Lord, we become inspired spiritually. We feel now I must chant, I must hear. Why? Because that person has got that potency to give that spiritual association. But in the presence of their association, one should not seek material benediction or material blessings, which we see these days. Many people say, please bless me with a nice car, or bless me with some nice bungalow, or bless me with nice children. Blessing, asking for a blessing to have good children who can become spiritually inclined is a good blessing. But to ask for his children also to be advancing in this material path is like, I'm sorry for the sound. So asking a material benediction from a sadhu is like a foolish thing. Like if somebody has got 100 crores, and if you go and ask him, can you give me 1 rupee? It is a foolish thing like that. So one should utilize the association of saintly personalities or devotees of the Lord to seek their help, which will help one progress in spiritual path. That is the purpose of association. Many times it is said familiarity breeds contempt. When you become very close in association, even with great personalities, even if they are spiritually realized, it brings to us to think that we have become very close, so that, and then you start ignoring because you feel you have become so close, but then you might not know what you may end up with. So that is why many times this is people who are initially coming in close association with spiritual personalities, they tend to seek material benediction, and when they seek that, then what happens is they lose their interest in spiritual life. So one should seek their association for spiritual advancement, not for material benediction. So that is how the power and purity of a saintly person comes to to whom he is giving the association. So this is what Devahuti is seeking from Kardamuni. After having realized that she spent a lot of time with him, becoming close to him for sense gratification. With this, I conclude the class for the day. Anyone who has got any questions, any comments, can ask me for the next few minutes. Any questions, any comments, anybody? Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandat Pranam.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandat Pranam.
Today you have given us the significance of utilizing the time. Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Yes, Prabhuji. Anybody else? Anything?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna. So can I take the class as concluded if there are no questions or comments?
Yes, Prabhuji. If there are no questions, we can end the session.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhuji. Dandat Pranam.
Thank you. Dandat Pranam.